Kuwait says that an Iranian attack on a desalination and electricity plant has killed a worker and caused damage to a building. Threats of escalation and soaring oil prices have Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman welcoming Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani and the King of Jordan, Abdullah, to Jeddah, an unscheduled visit that comes the same day where we heard a plea at an energy conference in Cairo from the Egyptian president.
You, Mr. President, are someone who loves peace, and I'm directing this message to you personally, on my behalf, on behalf of the entire region, and on behalf of the whole world. Given the serious consequences of the war continuing any longer, please, Mr. President, please help us stop the war. You are capable of doing so.
And that brings us to our Spotlight segment. And joining us from Mughla in Turkey, he's former UK ambassador to France, the United States, and Turkey. Peter Westmacott, Distinguished Ambassadorial Fellow at the Atlantic Council think tank. Thanks for being with us here on France 24.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, his plea to Donald Trump, will it be heard?
Well, I think I remember hearing Donald Trump saying that al-Sisi was his favorite dictator. I'm not sure that was regarded as a compliment in Cairo, but there is a relationship there. So if anybody is going to get through to Donald Trump, I would have thought that one of his favorite autocratic regional leaders should be on that list. I think also that some of the Gulf leaders, many of whom have, of course, been close business partners of Donald Trump and the family, would also be a bit tired of having a lot of Iranian drones and missiles lobbed in their direction. But at the moment, they seem to be blaming Iran rather than the President of the United States. So I don't know who he's going to listen to. The problem with this President of the United States is that he's somewhat unpredictable. Nobody knows what he's going to do from 1 hour to the next, one day to the next. But if he is now talking about having achieved regime change, maybe that's a signal. I was rather hoping that 10 days ago or more, he would have declared a great victory because he'd managed to assassinate the supreme leader of Iran, and that would have constituted regime change. But I was wrong, and that hasn't happened yet. So I don't know. But I think what we can say is that this is a campaign, this is a war that is not going as brilliantly for the United States and Israel as they had intended. And so maybe there is scope for some sort of negotiated outcome, or as we call it in the jargon, an off-ramp.
Ambassador Westmacott, you're not the only one wondering aloud why Donald Trump didn't take the exit ramps earlier.
You know, how many of us can actually say what goes on inside the president's head? Why did he start this in the first place is another question. Was it going to be like Venezuela, nice and easy, and then American oil companies can help themselves to the oil resources of another sovereign country? Was it about ballistic missiles? Well, for a moment it was. Was it about a nuclear threat? Doesn't seem like it was, although there was a bit of talk of that at the beginning from Israel and the United States, but nobody really believes there was an imminent threat of any nuclear weapon capability in Iran. Was it about the role of the proxies who make a lot of trouble in the Middle East? Well, many of those have been pretty much decimated, as the United States would say, by the war the last time around, back in June. So it's been hard to tell. Now he's talking about retribution for 47 years of terrorism. I saw that was in Donald Trump's statement earlier today.
All right, we seem to have some connection issues. Let's try to reconnect there with Mughla in Turkey with Ambassador Peter Westmacott. Let's see if we can reconnect. And yeah, you were saying that you listed there the reasons for us that have shifted over time. There must be a core reason, though, at the heart of all of this.
If there is a core reason, I'm not sure what it is. We've heard many different ones from the president. As I said just now, he was obviously lobbied by the Israeli prime minister and the head of Mossad. He's talking now, as I said, about retribution. There has been concern about Iran's ballistic missile capability and nuclear weapons, but I don't think that's an imminent threat. I think many of us are genuinely puzzled. And he didn't prepare the ground either with the Security Council of the United Nations, nor with the United States Congress, nor with his allies, countries like France, United Kingdom, who he expects to join him in this military adventure. So I cannot give you a single core explanation, I'm sorry, François, of why the president did this. I wish I could.
Yeah, and his traditional allies, which are trying to put their distance between themselves and him. We're hearing the likes of Germany more and more. Their policy statements have evolved over the last 1 month and 1 day. Most emphatic has been Spain, which announced this Monday it's closing its airspace to U.S. planes involved in Iran. This after saying that Madrid would not let bases jointly operated with Washington to be used. Let's take a listen.
We are not going to authorize, as we've said from the beginning, the use of the Moron and Rota bases for any act related to the war in Iran. Obviously, the bases are there and other actions can be carried out, but Spain will not authorize, has not authorized, does not authorize in any case the use of the Rota and Moron bases for a war to which we are totally opposed, which we do not believe in and which we find profoundly illegal and profoundly unjust.
Ambassador Peter Westmacott, is that the right approach?
It's a very firm rejection of the logic of what President Trump is up to. It's a harder line than I believe either the French or the British government have been taking. The British government at the beginning said we're not going to allow bases on UK territory to be used for offensive operations. And then within 36 hours or so, when the Americans reformulated the question and said, can we use them for defensive purposes or for attacking offensive capabilities like missile sites in Iran, then the British Prime Minister changed his position. But he remains of the view, like President Macron, that allowing offensive operations from British territory is not acceptable. Spain has gone further than that. They're saying no operations at all from the military bases in Spain. Turkey is next door to Iran, of course. They've got big NATO and military bases belonging to the Americans. They have not, as far as I'm aware, the Americans have not used any of those bases for operations in Iran. They have had a few missiles coming from Iran towards those installations, but they've all been shot down by NATO defensive systems. So Spain is hardening up its line, I would say. I'm not going to say whether it's right or wrong. Different governments have had to wrestle with this issue with some difficulty. And it's complicated because they have a question of rule of law, they have a question of their domestic politics, but they also have a strong defense relationship with the United States on whom much of Europe relies for its own security. So you have to keep all those elements in balance as you make your political judgments.
And you rightly point out how the United Kingdom and France are more speaking the same language. Let's listen to the British Prime Minister speaking earlier in the day.
Our pilots up in the air since an hour or two after this war started, defending British lives, British interests, and of course our allies in the region. We're allowing our bases to be used for defensive action to protect British lives and British interests and our allies in the region. And we are looking to see what we can do in the Straits of Hormuz, but we're not going to get dragged into this war.
So we're up in the air, we have all our military ducks in order, but we're not getting involved. Is that the right messaging?
Whether he wants it or not, the British government is a bit involved because, as he says, we've got aircraft in the air. We've also provided some ground-to-air missile facilities. We've got bases in Cyprus and other places not very far away from Iran. So in a defensive way, the United Kingdom is involved. And as the Prime Minister was saying, he obviously intends to play a part, but it's only a limited part because I'm afraid we haven't got much in terms of capabilities there anymore, of trying to keep the Straits of Hormuz open, or rather reopen the Straits of Hormuz. This is an enormously difficult task. If it was easy, the Americans would do it on their own rather than ask the rest of us to help. So, like it or not, we have allies in the Gulf states, amongst the Gulf states who are being attacked by Iran, who we would like to protect, and we are helping to protect. And we've got British interests in the region, so we are being involved, even if not dragged into the war in the sense of taking part in offensive operations against the Islamic Republic of Iran. I think that's the distinction that the Prime Minister was drawing.
So better to hear it from the Egyptian president, please, Mr. Trump, stop the war, than from the British Prime Minister or the French president?
My guess is that the British Prime Minister, and I suspect the French president, but who am I to say what's going on in his mind, are saying things in private to President Trump, saying, this is really not helpful. Then none of them were consulted in advance. None of them were told why the United States was launching this war. It's done untold damage to a lot of our interests in the region, to our own subjects, to our own economies. Look at the price of oil. Look what's going to happen to inflation. Look at the damage it's doing to economic growth in all of our countries. It is having enormously serious consequences on all of our economies and our livelihoods. We've all got thousands of people in the Middle East whose livelihoods are now in danger. So I think a lot of messaging will be transmitted. The question really is whether you do it in private or whether you do it in public. The Brits, on the whole, have tended to speak to Donald Trump in private. He tends to fight back and sometimes insult us in public, but that's kind of his manner. And I guess the Prime Minister has got used to having to shrug his shoulders and say, well, that's Donald Trump, but we have to continue to engage because America has launched this war with Israel without consulting neighbors, and we are all affected by it. And so therefore we have to remain engaged and try to, I would have thought, argue that it's time to finish this conflict. It's not going to go on and get any better, I would argue. This is people that are trying to draw a parallel with Vietnam and the word quagmire in English that we all used at the time. I'm not sure we're looking at Vietnam, but it has not been the quick and easy win which I suspect Donald Trump was looking for. The Iranians have fought back much better than anybody expected. They are doing real damage to America's and our allies in the Gulf. They are hitting targets in Israel. They can't reach the United States of America, but they have hit some American targets nearer home. In other words, why not settle for the great victory of regime change? He has, after all, killed the supreme leader, but he's got a hardline son of the supreme leader who would not have got the job, by the way, if his father had not been assassinated, in its place. Whether it is going to be a regime that's any better or easier for the rest of us to deal with is, as we say in English, a moot point. But why stick with this conflict, which is costing a fortune and doing a great deal of damage to everybody for what seemed to me to be minimal benefit? That, I suspect, I hope, is the message which is being transmitted to the Oval Office by many of America's friends and allies.
So it's sent to the Oval Office discreetly while Donald Trump insults in public. When you were ambassador to the United States under Barack Obama, was there ever a moment where you had to bite your lower lip and just keep quiet while the United States insulted the United Kingdom?
No, I don't think we had any insults. I was there for the 200th anniversary of the War of 1812, which was the last time the Brits and the Americans were fighting on opposite sides, and we had some sort of tricky moments, but they were mainly jokes about the history and the Brits burning down the White House rather than public insults. We had some tricky moments, sure we did. The British Parliament, for example, voted against allowing David Cameron, Prime Minister at the time, to join in military action against the Syrian government, which was using chemical weapons against its own people. And that was a moment of some sensitivity. Mind you, the United States Congress immediately told President Obama that they hadn't got the votes to support the same action either. And so we found another way, with the Russians, incidentally, of dealing with the problem of chemical weapons in Syria. But there was no, there might have been private dismay, if you like, at some of the way in which the alliance works, but we've never had this kind of public and somewhat childish insulting that we have all had to witness over the last 15 months.
Fast forward to 2026. Is the United States or France a better ally for the United Kingdom?
I'm going to be very British about this because I don't think, I've never thought we had to make a choice. I regretted that the United Kingdom left the European Union. And now that we have done so, I think it is good for Europe and good for the United Kingdom and good for our neighbours that we have a strong relationship with our European neighbours, especially France, our closest of all, and with the United States, on whom we do rely for a great deal.
Okay, but which do you trust more?
I'm not going to play that game, but I have spent 9 years of my life living in France. I love France. I have very strong relationships with many people there. I am currently somewhat disappointed in the way in which the United States is treating its allies. I don't think I'm going to go further than that.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. So many thanks, Ambassador Peter Westmacott, for being with us here on France 24.
My pleasure.